The sack hit the dusty wooden floor with a dull thud, its weight far heavier than the rancher expected. His calloused hands trembled as he loosened the rope around the mouth of the burlap bag. Before he even peeked inside, he could still hear her voice, cracked, desperate, trembling. "Please take them off." Those words haunted him, echoing louder than the cicadas in the evening air. He had seen storms rip barns apart, cattle run wild, and coyotes steal lambs in the dead of night, but never had anything struck his heart like the way her eyes pleaded with him just hours earlier. It had started that morning when Sarah, the widow who lived on the edge of town, walked into his ranch. She wasn't a woman who asked for much. Everyone in town knew she carried her burdens quietly, raising her little girl Emma after losing her husband in a tragic accident. But today, her hands shook as she clutched that sack to her chest like it was her last lifeline. She had come straight to him, the man known for his honesty, his strength, and his heart that could never quite say no to someone in pain. He offered her water, but she refused. Instead, with tears spilling down her cheeks, she whispered, "Please take them off." Then she set the sack on the floor, turned, and walked away before he could ask another question. Now, as he pulled the sack open, his breath caught in his throat. Inside were a pair of tiny, battered boots, child's boots, Emma's boots. But they weren't ordinary. Tied around the soles were crude metal shackles, heavy and rusted, the kind that had no place on a child's feet. The rancher's chest tightened as he picked them up, feeling the cold bite of iron against his fingers. He could see the scratches on the leather where Emma had tried to kick them off, the bloodstains where the shackles had dug into her tender skin. Anger and sorrow warred inside him. Who would do this to a child? Sarah's husband was gone, and she lived quietly with her daughter. No enemies, no debts, nothing that would call for such cruelty. But rumors had been swirling in town about a man who had recently returned, a drifter who once laid claim to Sarah's land. Some said he blamed her for keeping what he thought was his inheritance. Others whispered he had been seen lingering near her home at night. And now, these boots told a story too ugly to ignore. The rancher knew he couldn't stay silent. That night he saddled his horse and rode hard into the valley, determined to find Sarah. He found her sitting on the porch, Emma asleep in her arms. Her face was pale, but her eyes met his with both fear and hope. "I didn't know who else to turn to," she whispered. "He said if I tried to take them off, he'd come back and take her away. He locked her in them so she couldn't run." The rancher knelt beside her, his rough hand covering hers. "He won't touch her again," he said firmly, his voice steady even though his soul burned with fury. For the first time in days, Sarah allowed herself to cry freely. The shackles were gone, the boots cast aside, and Emma finally slept without pain. But the threat was real, and they both knew it. The next challenge came at dawn. The drifter returned, swaggering into Sarah's yard with a cruel grin. "Where's the sack?" he demanded. The rancher stepped forward, towering between him and the fragile family. The drifter sneered, but his confidence faltered when he saw the determination burning in the rancher's eyes. A fight broke out, raw, violent, filled with dust and blood. Every punch the rancher threw wasn't just for Sarah or Emma. It was for every innocent soul who had ever been shackled by cruelty. By the time it ended, the drifter lay defeated, his grip on fear broken. The sheriff came soon after, hauling the man away in chains that, for once, belonged to someone who deserved them. The townsfolk who had watched from the distance now stepped closer, their silence breaking into murmurs of respect. Sarah held Emma tightly, whispering words of comfort into her little girl's hair. The rancher stood nearby, his chest heaving, his knuckles bloodied, but his spirit unbroken. And in that moment, Emma looked up at him, her small voice trembling but clear. "Thank you for taking them off." Those words hit deeper than any wound ever could. The shackles were gone, not just from her boots, but from Sarah's heart, from their lives, from the fear that had haunted their home. The rancher never asked for thanks. He just nodded, tipping his hat as if to say it was nothing. But inside, he knew it was everything. Because sometimes, the greatest battles aren't fought with guns or wars. They're fought with courage, compassion, and the will to stand up for those who can't fight for themselves. So if this story moved you, if you felt the weight of that sack and the relief when it was finally opened, don't just let it end here. Like this video, share it so others can feel the power of hope, and subscribe for more stories that remind us that even in the darkest nights, There's always someone willing to take the shackles off, because the world needs more ranchers, and maybe, just maybe, you can be one too. The rancher stood there in silence, staring down at the battered little boots on his wooden floor. The shackles rattled faintly as he lifted them, their weight pressing deep into his calloused palms. For a long moment he couldn't breathe. This was no ordinary cruelty. It was a crime against innocence itself. He remembered Sarah's trembling words, her eyes heavy with fear. "Please, take them off." That morning had replayed in his mind a dozen times already. Sarah, pale and exhausted, had carried the sack into his barn. She had tried to be strong, but the tears betrayed her. When she set the sack down, her voice broke into a whisper. I can't do it alone. He said he'd come back if I tried. Please, just take them off." Before he could even ask who he was, she was gone, disappearing into the dust, leaving only the sack behind like a curse. The rancher gently placed the boots on his work table. His hands brushed against the crusted blood at the edges where the iron had bitten into Emma's soft skin. His jaw tightened. He had seen pain before. He'd buried friends, lost cattle to storms, even pulled neighbors from wrecks. But this was different. This was deliberate, calculated cruelty, and it had been done to a child. That night he rode hard under the moon, the hooves of his horse pounding like a drumbeat of justice. When he reached Sarah's small house on the edge of town, the windows glowed faintly. On the porch, she sat with Emma curled against her chest, rocking her as though she were a baby again. The rancher dismounted and stepped closer. Sarah looked up, her face streaked with tears but her voice steady. "Did you?" she asked, nodding toward his saddlebag where he had carried the boots. "They're off," he said softly, "and they'll never touch her again." Her shoulders sagged with relief, but the fear in her eyes didn't vanish. She glanced toward the dark road, as though expecting a shadow to emerge at any moment. "You don't understand," she whispered. "He said he'll come back for her. He said the boots were just the beginning. If I fight him, he'll take her away forever." The rancher's heart ached at her words, but his voice was calm, firm, unshakable. "Then let him try. He'll have to go through me first." Hours passed in restless silence. Sarah held Emma as she finally drifted into peaceful sleep, her tiny feet free of the cruel weight that had chained her. The rancher sat on the porch steps, watching the horizon, every muscle in his body ready. He knew it wasn't just about Sarah and Emma anymore. This was about the kind of world they all lived in. Whether men like that drifter could walk free, spreading fear, or whether good men would stand and say no more. At dawn, the sound of boots crunching on gravel broke the silence. The drifter appeared, his frame tall, his eyes dark with arrogance. His smirk widened when he saw Sarah clutching Emma. "Where's the sack?" he demanded, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you can just take what's mine?" The rancher rose slowly, squaring his shoulders. "Those boots were never yours. They don't belong to you. And neither does this family." The drifter laughed coldly. "Step aside, cowboy. You don't know who you're messing with." But the rancher didn't move. "I know exactly who I'm looking at," he said. "A coward who chains children because he can't fight men." That was enough to snap the drifter's temper. He lunged, fist swinging. The rancher met him head on. The fight was raw, brutal, dust rising around them, fists cracking against flesh. Each punch carried years of strength built under the sun, each strike fueled by the sight of Emma's scarred little feet. The drifter fought hard, but he had never fought a man who carried the weight of justice in his fists. Sarah shielded Emma, whispering prayers, her tears blurring the scene. The neighbors had gathered at the edge of the yard, whispers spreading, but none dared step in. They watched as the rancher and the drifter clashed like two forces of nature. Finally, with one last strike, the drifter collapsed to the dirt, groaning, defeated. The rancher stood over him, chest heaving, blood dripping from his split lip, his knuckles raw. But his voice was steady when he said, "You'll never lay a hand on them again." The sheriff, who had been alerted by the neighbors, arrived moments later. He looked from the drifter to the rancher, then at Sarah clutching her daughter. Without hesitation, he bound the drifter's wrists in chains, the kind meant for men who deserved them. As they hauled him away, silence lingered in the yard until Emma's small, trembling voice broke it. She peeked out from Sarah's arms, her eyes wide and shining. "Thank you for taking them off," she whispered. The rancher felt his throat tighten. He tipped his hat, his eyes softening. He didn't need medals, He didn't need thanks. But those words, those tiny, grateful words, were worth more than anything he'd ever been given. Life slowly returned to peace for Sarah and Emma. The shackles were gone, not just from her daughter's feet, but from Sarah's heart as well. The rancher continued his work, mending fences, tending cattle, but something had changed. Whenever he looked toward Sarah's house, he no longer saw a woman trapped in fear. He saw strength. He saw a mother who could finally hold her child without trembling. And the townsfolk whispered about that night for years. The night one rancher stood up when no one else dared. The night he proved that courage doesn't always come with guns or glory. Sometimes, courage looks like a man who refuses to let a little girl live in chains. So, if this story touched your heart, if you felt the weight of that sack and the relief when it was finally lifted, don't let it end here. Hit that like button, share this story so others can feel its power, and subscribe to this channel for more tales that remind us that even in the darkest nights, there are still people willing to stand for what's right. Because maybe the world doesn't just need more heroes. Maybe it needs more ranchers.